I do want to reflect the fact that there have been thousands of people bravely demonstrating on the streets of Gaza against Hamas, which is the governing authority in that strip. It's been going on all week. It's received relatively little attention in the British media, in the international media. But these people have been taking to the streets to demand that the group step down. And joining us now is Tom Gross, the international affairs commentator and human rights campaigner. He specialises in the Middle East, but we've caught him on a visit to the UK. Thanks for joining us in the studio, Tom. I think I've been watching these demonstrations with interest, amazement and a bit of hope. Is there any chance that Hamas will either fall as a governing authority or be pushed, do you think?
Well, yes. Good evening, Rachel. There is great hope from these demonstrations. They've happened now for 4 days in a row, including overnight, some of them. They've happened throughout Gaza, in the north, the centre and the south. So far, Hamas have not shot at the demonstrators, though they've been filming them. Because it's quite a serious threat to Hamas. You know, people don't quite realise Hamas is one of the most brutal police states in the world, and it is incredibly brave for people to come out. In the past, they have, rounded people up, beaten other Palestinians to death, thrown people off high-rise buildings and so on. So will Hamas give up without a fight? Absolutely not. In fact, there are reports in the last few minutes that Hamas may voluntarily release some Israeli hostages. But cynically, because they will do so in order to have Israel have a unilateral resumption of the ceasefire, and Hamas will use that time to restore order and suppress internal protest within Gaza.
It doesn't seem to be possible. I've seen thousands of people without wearing any face covering, so they are visible to Hamas. Hamas knows who they are. They can't presumably punish all of them, Tom, but that's fascinating that there may be a partial hostage release. I mean, Hamas is brilliant at playing the PR war, isn't it?
It is, but can I just make a comparison to Iran? In Iran, maybe 10 or 15% of the population support the regime. And at various times, most recently in the Women Life Freedom protests, hundreds of thousands of Iranians have, taken off their head coverings, come out on the streets. What the Iranian regime does is arrest a certain number, murder a certain number, and cower the rest of the population into silence. So, Hamas are the ones with the guns and the money, and therefore it is not that difficult for Hamas, that might represent 10% of the population of Gaza, to suppress street protesters against them. And I might add, the irony is that there are demonstrations against Hamas by Palestinians in Gaza, but we've had no demonstrations against Hamas on the streets of London or other British cities or Western cities or Western universities. The demonstrators in London and on campus and so on are in effect pro-Hamas demonstrators because they are backing up the regime. And that is not the same thing as being pro-Palestinian. Pro-Hamas is not pro-Gazan. Just like pro-the Islamic regime in Iran is not pro-Iranian.
I don't think many of the people I know who've attended pro-Palestinian rallies would say they are pro-Hamas, but I think what's interesting here,
in effect,
you could say they are adjacent to being pro-Hamas. What I would say is they are more anti-Israel. But what's interesting to me about you, we only heard a bit from, they were a Channel 4 Vox Pops conducted on the streets of Gaza this week. They are against Hamas. They, unlike the demonstrations amongst the Western intelligentsia, they are not against Israel in Gaza.
Correct.
They are against Hamas.
And not just that, they are the second most biggest slogan this week has been against Al-Jazeera, the Qatari government-funded TV network. Why? Because Al-Jazeera are a mouthpiece for Hamas and in the Arab world, in the Arab media. So the demonstrations are Hamas out of Gaza, Jazeera out of Gaza. I mean, the people on the streets of Gaza have a better understanding, I think, that a lot of the kind of what we might call useful idiots among certain academics and even some members of other media corporations here in Britain and elsewhere, who are, again, I'll say it again, they're not consciously pro-Hamas, but in effect they are pro-Hamas by regurgitating their slogans and propaganda and the like, and boosting their power. And that's why the demonstrators are also against Al-Jazeera, the main Arabic language broadcaster.
Right, well, can we turn to how Benjamin Netanyahu's government will be reacting to what they're seeing on the streets of Gaza? I know that the media that has shown what happens in Gaza isn't shown in Israel because they've banned Al-Jazeera, and I don't know if they're watching the BBC. I think it's very hard for people in Israel to see footage out of Gaza.
Oh no, all the footage has been shown by all the news channels every day.
Thank you for that. I mean, I thought it was different. So do you think that Netanyahu will adjust his war plan in the light of what looks like a kind of Gazan spring, or do you think he'll think, I can go in and mop up Hamas now?
Well, I can't speak for Netanyahu, but the Defence Minister, Katz, has made public statements in support of the protesters in Gaza, saying Israel shares your... There will be no war if Hamas were to surrender. And I might point out, right from the beginning of this war, after October 7th, 2023, there has been the offer to the Hamas leadership to surrender and go into exile at any time this war could have finished, were they to give up power and release the hostages. And that offer still stands. So to answer your question, I don't think Israel wants to send its soldiers into what you called mopping up Hamas in Gaza, because Israeli soldiers will also die in any such operations. Hamas are very well armed. Israel will welcome a surrender by Hamas, I mean, for sure.
And what chances are there that Hamas will do some performative type surrender to be the good guys in this situation? I mean, how will they play this? Of course, they have played the Western left like a fiddle. How are they going to what are they going to do next? Well,
the divisions within Hamas, and they're the external leadership mainly in Qatar and the internal leadership still inside Gaza, and they may not be having the external leadership may want to save, for example, the money they also have. They have billions of dollars in banks in the Gulf and so on, and they may want to, take a step back to live another day. The internal leadership, I'm not sure. Some of them are genuine jihadi militants that may prefer to die what they would see a martyr's death than any kind of surrender or ceasefire.
And in your view, what is the ultimate objective of Hamas? To retain power in Gaza, and it's also popular in the West Bank, according to polls, even more popular than it is in Gaza. When I say even more, I mean more popular.
Sure.
Is the ultimate objective of Hamas to take over and occupy the whole of Israel from the river to the sea, and still to eliminate all the Jews from Israel, and then maybe beyond, who knows? What do they want? What does it want?
Well, yes, that is their goal, although one of their first goals is actually to defeat their more secular Palestinian rivals, Fatah, that runs the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority. And the reason that there is a certain amount of support for Hamas among Palestinians on the West Bank is primarily because of the incredible corruption and repression by Fatah. It's not necessarily because people in the West Bank love Hamas. It's, they're two devils. Also not reported properly is the extent of the corruption. I mean, it's hard sometimes for people in the West to understand, but for example, if we look at Syria, where Assad was overthrown about 3 months ago, it came as a surprise, although it shouldn't have done, to people in the West, the sheer extent of joy and jubilation by almost everybody in Syria when Assad was overthrown. And I can confidently say that if and when the Iranian regime is overthrown, it will be the same in Iran, and it will be the same in the West Bank in Gaza. This isn't about liking Israel Israel or becoming supportive of the West or secular or anti-Islamic or whatever. It's living under an incredibly repressive regime. Both the Palestinian Authority that rules from Ramallah in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza are horrible regimes like North Korea or something, Now,
in our last minute, Tom Gross, can we just turn to the devastation that has been wrought in Gaza? The Hamas that runs the strip has released apparently these verified lists of the casualties that I think run to about 50,000. They've merited analysis. Huge numbers of orphans. 90% of the buildings have been razed, to the extent that Trump basically wants to send the bulldozers in and create the Middle East Riviera. What would you say as somebody who you speak for Israel, you stand for Israel, but you are also an expert? Life in Gaza is intolerable, and I think this is why Israel has lost the PR war. What would you have to say when people put this to you?
There's a lot to unpack in that question. First of all, I don't speak for Israel; I speak for the truth, and the truth is that a terror group that has a track record of lying is no more reliable than any figures made by, Al-Qaeda or Vladimir Putin or anything else. It is the figures you've just cited are inaccurate. The numbers of civilians among those figures are inaccurate. Having said that, there has been a huge amount of devastation in Gaza, undoubtedly, and loss of life, and it's going to take a major rebuilding effort.
10 years or so, and tens and tens of billions.
It's about no one wants to invest if Hamas is still there, and there will be a repeat of the war. So there first of all has to be a sustainable ceasefire and a governing authority in Gaza that doesn't want to send rockets into Israel, thereby provoking Israel to relaunch a war into Gaza. The UAE or Qatar or whoever else may invest, or private businesses, is not going to do that if there's going to be a war again.
And very last question. The evidence of these demos on the streets the last 4 days, do you think it stands up the hope that has been expressed by people like Ron Dermer in the War Cabinet that you can de-radicalise Gaza, you can perform a de-Hamasification?
Well, I don't know. It's very difficult. Look, America went to Afghanistan to try and replace the Taliban, and 20 years later, America left, and the Taliban are back in power. In other words, there's some deep-rooted beliefs in various societies. Even in Western societies, it takes decades to change opinions, so I can't comment. But what I can say is there can be a better, healthier education system like we have in countries at peace with Israel, like Morocco, like the UAE, where there's a better feeling between Moroccans and Israelis. That is possible in future, yes.
Tom Gross, international affairs commentator, thank you very much for your time this evening. And of course, Ron Dermer is now the Israeli ambassador to the US, isn't he?
No, he used to be.
So what is he now?
He's a member of the War Cabinet and
again?
already for some years, and a confidant of Netanyahu.
Okay. Thank you. I thought he'd been reappointed, but you're the expert, which is why you came in this evening. Thank you, Tom Gross. The time is 7:47.